Hi, my name is Kerry Critchlow from RCR Recording Studios, and today we are going to be talking about subtractive synthesis. And subtractive synthesis is the opposite of additive synthesis, where additive synthesis builds a sound by combining sound waves or sine waves with different frequencies and amplitudes. Subtractive synthesis starts with a rich waveform and removes harmonics with a filter. This is kind of stuff we've already gone over in previous videos, so we're probably not going to spend a whole lot of time going over this, but we are going to go over some of the basics here and just give you some quick examples of it. So we're going to bring up a synthesizer here and initialize it. Okay, so we have our synthesizer here, and I'll probably do this with a couple of different synthesizers just to give you some examples here of like some different modes and different ways of, different UIs, so that you can kind of start to get a grasp on how this principle is universal, dependent. Like, it doesn't really matter what kind of synthesizer you're using. This works with hardware units as well. Subtractive synthesis is probably the most common type of synthesis you'll see out there. Because it's a lot easier to have somebody just make a waveform for you, have it preset ready to go, and then you can start sculpting sounds from there. So anyways, we've gone over our basic saws, sines, squares, triangles. We're not going to spend too much time going over those, but we're going to go ahead and choose today maybe just a triangle for right now. And we'll go over some other examples later. But now we have a triangle as our sound source. And if we were to bring up I guess we can just... Okay, so that's what a triangle sounds like. And what we would do with this in order to do subtractive synthesis is right now the triangle has a rich, full harmonic sound. And we're going to subtract some of those harmonics, some of those upper frequencies. And I'm not sure if I was very clear in previous videos about what harmonics are. If we were to take a sound and analyze the frequency of it, so I don't know. This is probably going to be a poor example, but it's the best that I can do for right now without getting into like a lot of diagrams, and I just did not prepare for that today, so I apologize. But if we took a sound wave and we were analyzing it, well, actually, maybe a better... Do I have an EQ that does this visually? Let's see here. Okay, yeah, cool. Okay. So let's just do a quick little... And then we'll loop that. Okay, and then we're going to turn that down a little bit because it's probably a little loud. But anyways, so if we look here at this EQ, it's showing you what the sound wave is actually doing as far as the frequencies that it's affecting. And so, as you can see, down here we have the fundamental frequency. And then all of these guys here, these are the harmonics for this triangle sound, all right? And you can see that they're, popping up. And if we could, if we could zoom in, we could see the very specific frequencies that's happening with this. But you have your fundamental, which is the lowest sort of the fundamental frequency of the note. Actually, if we were to start this on I think this is 440A. I could be wrong. But you can see how okay. But you can see how this is, so 440 would be the fundamental frequency, and that's an A. And then it's adding other frequencies also. Now, we talked about this a little bit in our additive synthesis, but these harmonics, these are what's giving the sound its timbre, its tone, its recognizable sort of substance, if you will. It's the thing that's telling us what a triangle sounds like. If we were to come back here and do a sine wave instead, and reopen our EQ, it's just a fundamental frequency. There's no harmonics going on whatsoever, right? It's just the pure tone. That's why a sine wave is considered a pure tone. There are no harmonics. There's nothing that's being added to color the sound or make it, there's no harmonics happening. It's just the fundamental pure tone. And we contrast that with, say, a saw, which has a lot of harmonic information in it. We see what's happening here is we've got the fundamental, and then we've got these upper harmonics that are happening, and they're decreasing in volume or amplitude as they increase and go up the frequency spectrum. And so this is the mathematics stuff I was talking about in the last video, is that if you combine enough sine waves together at these very specific frequencies and amplitudes, it will eventually become a saw. So you can think of this as one sine wave, 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 and they're at specific frequencies, specific amplitudes or volumes, and you can sort of see how they come together to create this rich harmonic sound. We can do this with a square as well, might as well, since we've done the other ones here. And so you can see that you have, again, the fundamental, and then you have the harmonics, and this little box thing, I'm not sure if there's a way to get rid of it. Oh, there is. Excellent. So you can see that there are lots of little harmonics and then spikes, and so these sounds are creating a square sound. Now, what we're going to do is, well, with additives, again, with the I know we're talking about subtractive, but with additive synthesis, that's a sine wave here, there's a sine wave here, sine wave here, sine wave here, and you can see how some of them are louder, some of them are quieter as we go through the frequency register. And if we were to come and play a lower note, you can see that the fundamental starts lower. We still have other frequencies happening here, and if you were to analyze this, you could build this square sound with a sine wave, which is just a pure tone. If we go back to our sine wave here, and we were to bring up our analyzer here, you may not be able to hear this on a phone or a bad set of speakers, but you can see that this is a sine wave, and then there's no other harmonic information. You're just hearing this fundamental tone. And so if we were to add another sine wave at a very specific frequency, and then another sine and volume, and then another sine wave at a specific frequency and volume, we stack enough of those together, we can start to create any waveform we want. and that can be even complex waveforms. So like these are simple waveforms, saw, sine, square, triangle. We also have more complex waveforms, but these are pretty rich in harmonic information. I mean, if even just the saw wave here, you can see that there is a lot of harmonics happening, right? And because I'm playing different notes, we're getting the after image of a lot of different stack stuff. So, but you can also have more complex waveforms that exist, or that you can create, rather. So something like this. It sounds kind of like a square, all right? And if we were to bring up our EQ here, you can sort of start to see what's happening here with the frequencies. Now, what subtractive synthesis does, again, it's the opposite of the additive. So instead of creating these harmonics using sine waves, or creating this sound using sine waves, we're starting with this sound, and we're going to subtract these harmonics. So there's our sound. Now, if we were to, well, I'll just show you with an actual EQ here. Not this EQ, though. This one. We've seen this EQ before, all right? And an EQ, another word for EQ is filter. So when we filter something, we are removing harmonic information. So for instance, if we wanted to do a low pass, which is cutting out the high frequencies and letting the lows pass through, we can subtract some of those harmonics. So let's, set something maybe around like 3K-ish, 4K-ish, whatever this is. 2.5. The number's kind of irrelevant. I'm just giving this as an example. We're also putting this EQ before this harmonic analyzer EQ, if you will, this infinity EQ. So it's being filtered first, and then we're going to be able to look at what's going on. So first, we're going to turn off this EQ so nothing is happening, and we're going to play the note, and we can see all of the harmonic information that's happening, right? So we have the fundamental, and then we have all of the harmonics happening. Now let's turn our EQ back on. Now it's going to sound different, but it's also going to look different. We're not. It's going to cut off some of these frequencies up here and get rid of them. And so it sounds different, and we're getting rid of some of that harmonic information. And we can bring this down even more. And if we were to open up our EQ here, you can see that the volume has been turned down substantially on a lot of these frequencies over here, right? And the more we bring this filter down, the more harmonics we remove, until we almost start to get to the point where it kind of instead of sounding like whatever this waveform is, this DM12 tone mod or whatever this is, excuse me, it'll almost begin to sound like a sine wave if we remove enough harmonic information, because we're getting rid of the harmonics and we're getting closer to a pure tone. Right? They're still in there, but there's way less, as you can see. And the more we do this, the more pure the tone will get, right? And so we're starting with subtractive synthesis. We're starting with a complex waveform, and we're removing harmonics in order to change the sound. Starts with a rich waveform, removes harmonics with a filter. That's all we're doing with subtractive synthesis, is we're just getting rid of this. So in a synthesizer, this filter section is built in. So instead of having to bring up an EQ here like we did, we can actually do that right here in this section. And you can do this with different types of filters. So for instance, we can use a low pass right here. And bring down the cutoff here. Or bring it back in. And this particular filter allows you to have two different filters happening at the same time, and you can run them in series or parallel. We'll get into that kind of, we'll get into what that is later in future videos. But suffice to say, this allows for multiple filtering, essentially, and you can have different filter types. So, you know, you could have one that is a low pass, and then one that's maybe a high pass. And you can really thin out the sound. I'll turn it up a little bit. If we were to bring this up a lot, we're getting more of the full spectrum here. But the more we bring this down and the more we bring this up, the thinner the sound gets. And so essentially what I've done here is kind of similar to this type of thing. Not exactly. The numbers are going to be different, obviously, but that's kind of what it looks like when what I've just did to the sound. Is I've taken away the low frequency information and the high frequency information, and we just have this kind of mid-range sound left. All right. And then there are different controls that you can use along with this that, again, we can get into in the future, but it's not super important right now. We're just going over the basics. But we are essentially just taking this sound and filtering it to remove harmonics. And if we were to, say, bring up our EQ here again, our analyzer here, well, we've cut off a lot of the low-end information and some of the high-end information, and so it's very thin, and it's kind of living in this sort of area here, and we're really just hearing kind of the upper harmonics of the sound. We're not like really getting the fundamental anymore. So that's what Subtractive EQ is doing, is it's just taking a rich waveform, and it's using filters to get rid of harmonic information, whether it's high harmonic information or lower harmonic information down towards the fundamental. And so we will look at another synth here. We'll just go ahead and bring this down so it's the same. All right, and we will initialize this. And we'll do a triangle again. And all right. You can also do different waveforms. And if we were to say analyze, let's bring this down here, and we were to analyze this, you can see our fundamental frequency here, and then you can see the harmonics, and it's a little bit more complex, a little less, I don't know what the right word is, but you can see how when we hit this, we've got the fundamental frequency, and then we've got the harmonics here, and they're not quite as mathematically consistent, if you will. It's a little bit odder of a shape than our squares and our saws and things like that. But again, you can think of each of these here as a sine wave, and we've stacked these sine waves together, hundreds of them, to give this sound. It kind of has an organish sound to my ears. And like, as we can keep going here. And we can analyze this one as well. And this one is a little bit more mathematically consistent, if you will. I mean, it's not perfect, but like it's a little bit more like a saw sort of a pattern here. And then we can come in here, and we have our saw, and we have a filter section here, and we can choose our filter type. So right now it's a low pass filter here, LPF low pass filter. We'll do a dual mode so that this one filter is going to cut off all the information instead of having them in parallel. Again, we'll get into that later, but okay, and then we can have this one be a high pass filter. All right. And again, that's given us this this type of scenario here. We have when you combine a low pass and a high pass, you're cutting off the highs and lows. And if we were to play that, we're changing the waveform or the frequencies that are happening in the harmonic. So our fundamental is a little lower, and we're getting just a different waveform. So that's what subtractive synthesis is we're just taking a complex waveform and we're getting rid of the harmonic information to change the sound. All right, we're subtracting harmonics. And we do this to, our own preferences here. To get whatever kind of sound we want, right? And that's sort of what's, and that's how we're shaping this waveform. Now, there are other ways to shape waveforms, but this is the crux of subtractive synthesis. We start with a complex waveform that has lots of, harmonic information, or maybe in the case of a sine wave, it has, just the fundamental. But then we subtract those harmonics, and that's how we shape our waveform and change it to sound different. And this is all kind of part of the sound design that we've been going over the last, few weeks, however long it's been. And this is the basics of it. From this, you can do other things. You can, throw an LFO on it or whatever. The same would be true with the additive. Once you create this, the sound wave you want, you can then manipulate it. You can do additive, and then once you've created your sound wave, you can then do subtractive, which is to take away some of those harmonics. And then you can start to shape it with your ADSR envelopes. You can use LFOs, low frequency oscillators, to make the sound change over time. You can use effects, all sorts of things in order to create different, sounds or to have it change over time or however you want to do it. But this is all kind of part of it. And subtractive part of it is, the taking away of the harmonic information. So we understand additive and subtractive. At this point, you should have a pretty good handle on both what they do, how they work. Maybe we can bring up one more example here. I don't know if I have any other really good synthesizers that would be great at demonstrating this or not. Or none that I use often, we'll say. We'll bring this one in here. Okay, so we have our synthesizer here. So again, we don't have really any control over the with this particular synthesizer. We don't have a lot of control over the waveform itself. It's kind of just whatever it is. So in this case, if we were to play this, that's what it is. Whatever that waveform is, our oscillator, we don't have control over whether we want it to be a sine, a triangle, or whatever. In this particular kind of thing, if you will. So our oscillators are sort of pre-designed depending on what kind of synthesizer you bring up, but we can control the filter section of it. So we can come over here and we can have a low pass, a notch, or a formant. In this case, it defaults to a low pass, and then we can bring this down to get rid of some of that. We can push this resonance knob here, and if you've looked at previous videos, again, you should understand resonance, but just as a sort of a reminder or a refresher, if we were to do a high pass and then we play with this Q setting, this is the resonance, right? So it's just a peak that's happening. And if we were to bring this down, first of all, let's turn this filter off for now. Sorry if the volume got a little quiet there. We're going to bring the, turn off the filter here on this synth, and we can use this as an example here. And you can make this a sharp resonant, a minor one. And that's kind of what this control here, this resonance control is doing. So if we turn this filter back on here and we play it, so that's a really high filter. I didn't realize it would be quite that much, but right. And then we can have our LFO move it automatically for us if we wanted to. Sorry about that. The gains on this board are a little dusty. I should probably fix them out, but we can. So we're using an LFO to have this move back and forth automatically for us, and we can have it move faster. All right, and we have different controls, right? So we can have it be a daft LP. I'm not sure what daft stands for. We have a ladder, low pass. We have notch, which instead of doing a low pass is going to just look like something like this. All right, just a notch. Right. And so, well, yeah, we can combine our filters with our LFOs, and different interfaces are going to have different ways of doing that, using the LFOs or combining, or how you would go about using them, etc. But that's not what this video is about. We're just kind of getting into the basics of Subtractive. And Subtractive is the easiest form of synthesis because all of the kind of hard work, so to speak, is being done for you. The oscillators, the waveform is already being generated for you, and you don't have to worry about creating the waveform like you would in additive synthesis. And then at that point, you can just use Subtractive synthesis to start removing the harmonics that you don't want in there, and then you can use your LFOs, your envelopes, and things like this to sort of change the sound and manipulate it. So I hope all of this has been helpful. I hope you have a better understanding of what additive and subtractive synthesis are. We will get more into the specifics of what some of these controls are. Not every synthesizer is going to have every single one of these controls, as you see with this synthesizer here. It's a little bit less complex, less less options, less bells and whistles, but that doesn't mean you can't have some fun with it and enjoy some some fun stuff with it. Yeah, so here'd be a synthesizer as well. Again, the oscillator is already been chosen for you, and then you have a filter section and an envelope section: attack, decay, sustain, release, ADSR, and then you have some effects, that kind of thing. So most synthesizers, if you can't, some will allow you to choose your oscillation, some won't. Some will allow you to do various things, but like they're all gonna mostly be the same. And once you start understanding some of the basics of what's going on, you can start to really start designing sounds in a way that is purposeful, if you will. Yeah, again, it's like, again, you don't have any control here over the oscillator, but you can play with the filters. You can play with some effects if you want. And you have your ADSR envelopes. And we've gone over all of this before. We're going to get into it in more detail in future videos. But I just wanted to give you some examples here of some different types of synthesizers, the interfaces. Some are going to have a little bit more, allow you to have a little bit more control over each aspect of the sound than others. They're kind of not all synthesizers are designed to do necessarily the same thing, but they're all going to kind of have some tools that will allow you to play with the sounds and make them more your own, if you will, to tweak them. And so we're going to get more into that in future videos, but I wanted to cover some of the basics of the types of synthesis. And remember, synthesis is just the process of creating new sounds by manipulating and combining different audio sources. Additive synthesis, the sound source would be sine waves that you combine to create a complex waveform. Subtractive, the waveform is already rich. It starts with that rich waveform, and then you can remove the harmonics with the filter. And we'll get into some of these other types of synthesis as well. Some are going to be more useful than others, depending on what you're kind of working on. And I'm not an expert at all of these types of things. Like, for instance, I've never really tried to do physical modeling or vector synthesis. I don't even know if I have synthesizers that do this, so I'm not sure how well I'll be able to cover these types of concepts. But we can get into like FM and things like that. And then we'll get into the actual controls of what each of these synthesizers are doing, and how you can start going about manipulating things and just get a kind of understanding, so that when you open up your synthesizer, whatever you happen to be using, you kind of have a framework of what to do to start changing the sound and making it more your own, or building it from scratch, or whatever you want to do. So anyways, I hope this has all been helpful. You should have a much better understanding of additive and subtractive synthesis. Again, subtractive synthesis is probably the most popular out there, or the most common, we'll say. Certainly, I would say is probably the easiest to work with. Additive, you have to have some mathematical understanding in order to create those complex waveforms in a meaningful kind of way. Lots of math under the hood, as we saw when we did our analysis here of the harmonics and things like that, and understanding what these harmonics are doing, where they need to be placed, and at what amplitude, things like that, is all part of the additive synthesis. Subtractive is simple. You're just taking the harmonics away. So yeah, anyways, I hope this has all been helpful. I hope you have a better understanding of those concepts. Like I said, we're going to be getting into other types of synthesis in the future, but we're starting to quickly get to the point where my personal knowledge and expertise is running a little bit thin outside of granular and frequency modulation synthesis. I don't know as much about these other types of synthesis, and so we may not get into those in any kind of real detail. I'll maybe do my best to just sort of give a brief explanation of what they are or how they might work, but I don't know if I'd be able to do any practical examples of them. And so going into once all that is finished, we're going to go into the different synthesizers and really go into detail about the different controls and how you go about, working this. We've gone over the basics before, and if you watch that video, you really should have a pretty decent understanding of what most of this stuff could do, or what happens if you turn some of these knobs and things like that. But we will, get more into this in the future. It's sound design and synthesizers is kind of a heady thing to wrap your head around, and hopefully I'm doing a okay job at explaining how this is all coming together. So anyways, with that, I wish you a wonderful week. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.